Hello, welcome to Winery Biz 101. My name's Jack Rhino, and I'd like to thank you for joining my presentation, Cost of Goods Sold for Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon from a 5,000 case winery perspective. If you've seen my other video, Adding Value in the Wine Business, you're familiar with this illustration. It's really just a pictorial view of the different processes that you go through in making and producing wine and the value at each step of that process. So for example, when you start off with bare land, there's zero value in producing a bottle of wine. But when you go through the processes of developing a vineyard, planting the grapevines, farming those grapevines, and harvesting the grapes, you'll actually create a value of $6.11 a bottle equivalent. So this is a graph I'll come back to at the end of the presentation, but I do want to refresh your memory in terms of how this value process works, this value stream. So the question is, what goes into wine cost of goods sold? And it's really pretty simple, straightforward. There's the operations staff, the production facilities overhead, grapes, harvest processing, bulk wine storage and aging, bottling, and warehousing. So if I want to break these down, the staff and facility component is highly variable and specific. It's variable based on acquisition costs, the type of wine produced, the equipment and processes used, as well as human resource needs and philosophy. Because it's so variable, what I've decided to do for this analysis is assume that I'm going to use the typical Napa or Sonoma custom crush pricing. Now these are the pricing that you'd see from larger producers that are in the business of making wine for other wineries. Costs are not directly the same as you would see if you had your own winery, and so I'm going to include another category called other, where I'm going to try and make apples to apples. But in this presentation, I'm assuming that the winery produces a total of 5,000 cases, and the lot size or variety size is approximately 1,000 cases. The first component is the grape component and the price there. And this is a report put out by the state of California. It's the Grape Crush Report. And Napa is District 7. So if you move along the right until you find column number 4, I'm sorry, it's District 4, not 7, and then line that up with Cabernet Sauvignon, what you'll identify as a figure of $4,619. Now this is the average amount that a grower received for his grapes in 2009. So to put this into a cost of goods per case equivalent, it's simple math, just taking $4,619 divided by 60 cases, or just under $77 per case. Now there's some production assumptions I've made for this presentation. One I mentioned before is I'm going to use Napa or Sonoma custom crush pricing. This pricing is variable. It's based on an a la carte menu, so the more or less things that you do in making your wine, the more or less expensive it will be. I've assumed a world-class production techniques. These are some of the processes that some of the top winemakers in the country are using. And one thing to note is that if there are winemaking problems, it will increase these costs. I've assumed kind of a perfect scenario where nothing's gone wrong, but if something does, there's more processing and time and cost that's associated. So there's several different categories. The harvest period is actually the period from the time the grapes are picked through the end of the year. Storage and aging is typically 18 months past that until the wine's in the bottle. And for warehousing, I've assumed a 6-month bottle age with a 12-month selling cycle, a total of 18 months. And lastly, I've assumed a premium package. By that I mean heavyweight glass, first-grade corks, tin capsules, and a front and back label. The harvest component, I've broken this out by a number of items, and just to give you an idea of what really is involved. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but crushing and pressing using open-top fermenters will cost about $11.67. You work your way down, and the total harvest costs are going to run just under $16.46. The bulk storage and aging components, this is primarily barrel aging with a little bit of tank storage, and then blending and filtration. And if I add up all those costs, that's about $9.59. The bottling component, again, in that 1,000 case quantity, will cost you about $44.20 a case. The glass about $9.69. Corks, capsules, labels, all those total up about $22.31 a case. And lastly, warehousing, there's some in-out charges and so much per month, assuming 18 months, that will cost about $2.10. The other, this apples to apple component, I've assumed we've gone out and hired a winemaking consultant or a winemaker, and that individual will make the wine for $10 a case. Certainly you can spend quite a bit more than that, but that's a number if you find someone that has multiple clients, is in that range of possibility. Also an alternating proprietor, which is an expense that actually makes you a legal winery within a winery. That will run about a little over $3 a case. And lastly, barrels and racks. I've included this as a cost of goods, whereas from a pure accounting perspective, it's going to be a capitalized expense, but I just did want to capture that so you had a better feel for what it really costs to make a case of Cabernet Sauvignon. So all those total up to about $32.65. So just adding up each of those components then, the $76.99 for the grapes, $16.46 for the harvest section, and so forth. A case of Cabernet will cost about $160.10 to make. That's Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. So let's go back to this value stream. Now if you remember that, the bottled wine section and the price there is typically what a winery will sell the wine to a distributor for. So that's what's known as a three-tier distribution. So depending upon the retail of the wine, which if it's $20 a bottle, the winery is selling to the distributor for $10, and $40 selling to the distributor for $20. If you compare that to the bottom of the slide, we know that we have a $13.34 cost of goods per bottle, which is the 160 divided by 12. And you look at that, and the margin contribution isn't going to make any sense at $20 a bottle retail, and probably doesn't make any sense at $40 a bottle retail, which is why you see so many Napa Valley Cabernets out there at $60, $75, or even more a bottle. An alternative that I want you to think about in terms of going to market is what in the industry is called direct-to-consumer sales, which is where it's not sold through distribution, it's sold through email, internet, and at the tasting room. And that's where the winery actually sells it direct to the consumer. So instead of getting $10 a bottle, they're getting 20, or instead of 20, they're getting 40, and so on and so forth. Now there are some additional costs in selling wine that way, which will be a topic of another video of mine, but you know, those margins, or the potential for margins, is why you're seeing so many of the smaller wineries move further and further towards direct-to-consumer marketing. So in summary of cost of goods, staff needs and facility overhead is highly variable and specific, so every winery is going to be a little bit different. Grape costs can represent 50% or more of the total cost of goods. Napa's a little bit of its own unique animal. If, for example, if I took Sonoma County Cabernet, which is District 3, cost of goods, rather than being $160 a case, would be about $120 a case, and all the other winemaking processes were identical, so it's about a $40 a case swing just based on the source of the grapes. Like many things, production efficiencies, as production costs, as volume increases, production costs decrease. And then again, I just want to make sure you understand that if there are winemaking problems, that there will be increases in the cost of goods. So the end statement I want to make and have you go away with this is that understanding the value stream and cost of goods is critical in developing a successful winery business model. The third component is understanding the cost of sales and how the wine will be sold into the marketplace. This will be the topic of my next video, and is really the discussion of three-tier distribution versus direct-to-consumer and the costs and margins from that activity. So thank you again for joining me at Winery Biz 101. Please look me up at my website, winerythink.com, and enjoy the videos there. Thanks.